Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Sematary Club. We are in the cemetery where Gage is residing. Lewis has gone through this elaborate plan and he parks his car. He has to find a way in because the gates are locked, which he kind of expected, but it would have made it a lot easier had they not been locked. He has to kind of walk the perimeter and try and find the best access point. The gates are 9 feet tall and have spikes on the top. And all I can think about is the cemetery scene in The Omen and Gregory Peck's unfortunate arm piercing. So yeah, Lewis has to climb a tree and then he has to kind of shimmy out across the cemetery and drop down. He finds that he can actually remember very little of Gage's appearance, which bothers him. He can remember little bits, but he can't put them all together and make a cohesive Gage. Quote, he could see these things but could not integrate them into a coherent whole. Page 334. Now, Rachel has decided that it's important for her to get home. She doesn't care. She's turning right back. She's going home. So she has called the airlines and there's a whole bunch of connecting flights she has to make. That it's not an easy flight. And she writes it all down and starts her journey. So we've got a lot of things going on at the same time. Lewis is digging up Gage and is going to rebury him. Rachel's trying to get back to Ludlow and Judd is trying to watch for Lewis to intervene. So Lewis does dig Gage up, and it's a very grim scene. You know, can you even imagine what it would be like to stumble upon someone digging up the corpse of someone that they had recently buried because they are going to try and perform some sort of magic spell on them? You know, it's just, it would be staggering to see something like that, and, you know, just the amount of grief that Lewis has, and guilt also. He feels guilty. He feels like, you know, he's had a part in this. He feels like he should have saved Gage from the fate that befell him, and he just, you know, wants his family to be happy again. Rachel calls Judd. She is actually in Maine at the time. She missed one of her connecting flights, and she's going to drive. She rented a car. She's going to drive the rest of the way through. And he is disturbed by the fact that she is currently in the same state. You know, he thought that it was safe. She and Ellie were quite a ways away, and he was pretty convinced he could handle Lewis on his own. He finally convinces her to get a motel room and to just, you know, not worry about coming right away. And she agrees, but then at the last minute, of course, she changes her mind. Judd was sleeping when Rachel called, and then he drifts off again. He told himself, you know, you have to stay awake. This is important. No sleeping on sentry duty, you know, and he fixes himself some coffee and he sits there and smokes and drinks coffee. But the thing is, the power is hypnotizing him, and he knows it. And it's disturbing him that he is possibly, you know, going to miss his opportunity to stop Lewis. Which he does. He falls asleep again. Just, you know, half an hour later, Lewis shows up. And he was definitely put to sleep in the same way that back when he was burying Spot, something was keeping him awake. Something wanted to be fed. In this case, something wants him out of the way. And then the theme of owning something comes back into it. Quote, no sleeping on sentry duty, old man. You let it get hold of you. You bought something, and now you have to pay for it. Page 354. So there's that whole thing, again, about when you have created the mess, you own the mess, and you have to be accountable, and you have to see it through. Lewis has Gage in hand. He has wrapped him up. You know, he's ready to take him up to the pet cemetery and then go over the deadfall and to the burying ground. And he keeps having these moments of rationality peek through. Like, he stops and observes himself as an outsider. And he's like, am I really doing this? What is happening? How is this progressing? This is not good. This is insane. Quote, was he really going into the woods with this corpse in his arms, passing under the trees where the wind walked from darkness into darkness? And alone this time? Don't think about it. Just do it. Page 356. So he's scared. He doesn't want to do this, really. But, you know, the thought of having Gage be alive, damn the consequences, is really what's drawing him. That and the power is pushing him to do it. He walks up there and he starts seeing spirits. And he sees creepy images. He sees this huge hulking thing. He hears it first, and then it passes by him, and it's so tall that he has to crane his neck up to see it. And it's foggy. It's really terrifying. He's holding his dead son. This thing that is not human and not exactly a spirit, it's actually there, is right next to him. And he knows, after looking at it, that's the Wendigo. The Wendigo is what made the burial ground go bad. Quote, "It was no shade, no insubstantial ghost. He could feel the displaced air of its passage, could hear the mammoth thud of its feet coming down, the suck of mud as it moved on. For a moment he believed he saw twin yellow-orange sparks high above him, sparks like eyes." Page 364. Which also makes me think about, Pennywise again. Oh, Randall Flagg had the yellow eyes. It has the yellow eyes. I don't know. Could be an it thing. As Lewis is doing this, Rachel has made her determination that she's still going to drive through. Even though she had promised Judd she wouldn't drive through, she's going to. And she realizes that part of what's driving her is that Lewis seemed scared. She didn't really want to see it because she was grieving, but she said that once she started thinking about it, he looked like someone who wanted to be stopped. And she isn't thinking anything supernatural because she doesn't know any of the church or Timmy Baterman or anything like that. She doesn't know any of that stuff. She's thinking maybe Lewis is going to kill himself or do something normal, not try to resurrect their dead son. So Judd is sleeping. Lewis is still in the woods with Gage. He finds the steps. He has made it all the way to the burial ground. So he's climbing the steps. He gets to the top and, quote, "He cocked his head back once and saw the mad sprawl of the stars. There were no constellations he recognized, and he looked away again, disturbed." Page 365. And that is such a chilling image. The fact that it's like a different world, like a different dimension or something. He doesn't recognize the stars. That would be very disconcerting, especially because stars are supposed to orient you and guide you. So the fact that even if you don't know what they look like, if you can tell that they're off or that they look wrong, that's a really chilling thing. And Lewis notices that the stones that he had seen before that were just kind of knocked about were actually cairns that had fallen into a spiral shape once everything burst forth from the ground. So there's this huge spiral created by these cairns of, dead things popping up. He's still telling himself, well, if anything goes wrong, no one has to know about it. It'll be fine. I'll be the only one privy to it, and that's not going to make me go crazy or anything like that. If it does happen, and I do have to kill my son for a second time, it's just incomprehensible. Go back to Rachel, and she is driving and falling asleep at the same time. She has done that a couple times, and she's almost died a couple of times because she has been actually asleep at the wheel. And after that last time where she was like asleep and dreaming, she almost didn't right herself. She scraped alongside the barrier on the side of the road, and she almost didn't make it. And she pulls over for some coffee. She gets her coffee, feels better, and the power is, doing all this stuff to prevent her from intervening, and her car just dies. Inexplicably. There's no reason. It's a newer car. It shouldn't have died. And so, the power extends for such a long way. It's very interesting. So Lewis has finished the burying of Gage, and he has climbed back over the deadfall. He's in the pet cemetery, and he turns back to look at the deadfall. Quote, "Something was moving back there. Something was moving on the other side of the deadfall. What he heard was a stealthy kind of sound, the furtive crackle of pine needles, the dry pop of a twig, the rattle of underbrush. They were almost lost under the sough of the wind through the pines." Page 371. And Lewis immediately, before he can stop himself, calls out for Gage. And then he knows, somehow, that it's too early for it to be Gage. And that kind of freaks him out. That he's standing here, calling out to his dead son, in the middle of the pet cemetery, in the dark, while something is rustling around on the other side of the deadfall. So he gets really scared and he backs away, but he keeps his eye on the deadfall. And he kind of backs away until he can't see it anymore. Then he turns around and walks. And then the very last quarter mile or whatever, he starts running. He books it. Lewis is exhausted and he falls asleep right away. He is just out. And Gage comes home during this time. He comes in, he watches Lewis sleep. He watches him, this dead thing. Then he comes into the room and he rifles through Lewis's medical bag. And Lewis can smell Gage because he has that foul, earthy odor to him. And in his sleep, he kind of recoils from that smell, but he doesn't wake up. And Gage finds what he's looking for, which is a scalpel, and he takes off, and Lewis sleeps on. Now we're on part 3, which is Oz the Great and Terrible, and that's how Zelda used to say Oz the Great and Terrible. So Gage has returned. Rachel is still driving. She got her car fixed by some guy on the road, some trucker. It was just a loose cable of some kind. Lewis thinks everything is normal. He doesn't expect Gage yet. Gage goes over to Judd's house and he kills him. He and Church team up. They trick Judd. They get him off of his nap, his Pet Sematary induced nap that he was having, and he's all disoriented and he's confused and he's slow. He wakes up. They're in his house already. You know, he goes for a weapon, so he goes to the kitchen to get a knife. And then they start playing mind games with him, which I don't know if they're mind games or not, because when Timmy Baterman came back, he was this all-knowing demon thing, and the things he said were true. So Gage opens his mouth and starts talking to Judd about Norma. He's talking in Norma's voice, saying that, you know, I laughed at you with your friends, and I had sex with all of them, and, you know, you went to your whores, and you thought I didn't know about it, but I have been screwing your friends, basically, this whole time. And I don't know if we're led to believe that's true, because the demon things that come back seem to know things. Norma wasn't what Judd actually thought she was, or Gage is just fucking with Judd. And either way, you know, it's sad. It's sad that Norma was used in that manner, but it's also so different from Timmy Baterman, who wasn't violent. You know, he didn't have this need for bloodlust and revenge. I mean, I do understand that Judd was trying to keep Lewis from burying Gage, so revenge, you know, seems likely. But Gage has a different quality to him. Basically, Judd gets tricked and Church trips him up. He loses his knife, it goes under the refrigerator, and Gage just scalpels the fuck out of him, kills him. So Judd is no more. So now that Rachel's vehicle has been repaired, she does arrive at Judd's house first because she had promised she would do that. She wants to hear the story, and, you know, she doesn't see Lewis at home. Like, she doesn't see his car in the driveway or anything like that anyway, so she does go to his house first. She rings the doorbell, no answer, because Judd is dead, and she hears meowing from inside, which she thinks sounds like Church. So she opens the door, investigates. Church is there, he's got blood on his whiskers, so then she starts worrying about Judd, so she goes upstairs to see. And who's up there but Gage? And Gage scalpels her too. So I don't know why this demon Gage thing is so bloodlusty. Why it wants to kill everyone. Why Timmy Baterman didn't want to kill his father, but Gage wants to kill his mom. Unless he thinks his mom had a part in killing him? I don't know. I don't understand exactly why Rachel's a victim. Maybe it's to punish Lewis. Lewis is on the hook. Maybe it's manipulating Lewis further by killing off everyone that he likes. Lewis wakes up. He sees the rental car parked outside of Judd's house, and he doesn't really think anything of it. He goes downstairs, he's going to make breakfast, and he gets a phone call. All of a sudden, he knows that it's bad news. He knows it's something he doesn't want to know about. He shouldn't answer the phone if he doesn't want to know, but he's compelled to do it. He answers, and it's Rachel's dad. And all of a sudden, it just all falls into place for him. He's talking on the phone with Rachel's dad. He's asking if Rachel got in okay. Lewis is noticing that there are muddy, child-sized footprints walking through the house. and he knows that Gage has come back and that Gage is not here anymore. And he figures Gage is across the street. So Rachel's dad is mostly calling because Ellie has had a whole series of nightmares, and she went into hysterics and she had to be sedated by a doctor. She had such terrible dreams about Rachel dying and about Gage and Church and Lewis, but she can't really remember them. And Lewis asks, did she say anything that you could understand? And Rachel's dad says, yes. She said, quote, Paxcow says it's too late, page 394. And that just seals everything for Lewis. He knows Pascal equals Paxcow. That just solidifies everything for Lewis, and he is without any hope at this point. Lewis goes across the street armed with some syringes full of morphine. He sees Church over there. He picks him up and stabs him with the needle and kills him. He discovers Judd, and he covers him with a cloth. He feels really terrible that Judd is dead. And while he's doing that, he hears a sly, stealthy noise upstairs, which is very reminiscent of when Mike Ryerson was upstairs in Salem's Lot and he wanted someone to hear him and investigate. It's that kind of thing. So Lewis climbs up the stairs. He's got his syringes ready. He sees Rachel just slumped there, and he starts screaming. Quote, Rachel had not just been killed. Something had been at her. Page 401. And then Gage appears, and he's got blood all over his mouth, all over his chin. So he's been eating his mother. It's very weird. Very weird. Lewis fights with him. Gage has quite a lot of strength, which doesn't really translate in the movie. He ends up killing him. He ends up killing Gage. He's just completely shattered now. His mind is snapped. So he goes into the corner and he just sits there. He sits there and he curls into a little ball. All of a sudden, it dawns on him that he waited too long with Gage, and if he buries Rachel right now, the odds are better. So he picks Rachel up, he douses the entire house with gasoline, lights it on fire, and goes to bury Rachel in the burial ground. This time, Steve Masterson, his coworker, has gone to Lewis's house to check on him, and he's distracted by the fire at Judd's house. So a crowd is gathering, everyone's looking at this fire burning down the house. They're trying to assess if Judd is inside or not, and he sees something out of the corner of his eye. He sees what he thinks is Lewis carrying something white. So he ends up running through the woods after Lewis. He gets to the pet cemetery and sees Lewis walking up the deadfall with a body. An obvious body. It's got like one shoe sticking out of this sheet and it's just limp. And Steve Masterson knows that it's Rachel. So Steve is very intrigued. He's not completely horrified. The power has started working on him, and Lewis turns around and he's like, hey, I don't have any tools. I'm gonna have to bury her by hand. Do you want to come help me? And Steve finds that he does want to help. He wants to learn about the secret. He wants to know what's going on. He wants to be a part of this thing. And so he starts to follow Lewis. He climbs up the deadfall, and then he chickens out. He chickens out and he loses his balance, and he comes back down the deadfall. Quote, and then, perhaps simply because it had enough for one day to feed on and lost interest in him, the call of the place in his mind simply ceased. Page 409. So Steve Masterson escaped. Barely. And he books it out of there. He runs away, leaves Ludlow, doesn't ever come back. And occasionally he will have dreams of this, but he doesn't remember them when he wakes up. He doesn't remember that day. He doesn't remember seeing Lewis carrying Rachel's body. He doesn't remember any of that, which is probably for the best. Then we have the epilogue, and it's now after midnight. Lewis is sitting in the kitchen and he's playing cards. And all of a sudden, quote, a cold hand fell on Lewis's shoulder. Rachel's voice was grating, full of dirt. Darling, it said. And that's how the book ends. That part disturbs me so much. Her voice was grating and full of dirt. That imagery just creeps me out. Creeps me out. So that is Pet Sematary. And, what about all the loose ends? There are so many loose ends with this one. Like, what happens with Ellie? What happens with Rachel and Lewis? Does she kill Lewis, like in the movie? Or does Lewis end up taking her away like he was going to do with Gage. He was going to take Gage and then call Rachel and Ellie to come see them, and then they were going to kind of create a new life with new identities. So, I mean, I don't think Rachel is going to be good or let that happen, but I'm guessing that was the plan. Like, he's probably going to take Rachel, go get Ellie somehow, and the three of them are going to kind of be fugitives. But we know how evil this stuff is that comes from that place. So does she kill her? Does she kill Lewis? Is she running around? Like, what has happened? What do you think happens? I want to know. Because even if she kills Lewis and then she's just wandering about, does someone end up shooting her? And like she's a zombie? But then doesn't that start a whole different chain of events? I don't know.